Right, a lot of you will know me, some of you might not. I've been technical coordinator of the SLTC since 2008. Previously, I've got a degree in colour chemistry and dyeing. I can tell that to the lady from the sun, I won't remember. But I'm a chartered chemist, and I've been at SATRA since 1996. Initially working in chemical and analytical technology, now as a team leader in the research department. Before that, I was at Cheltenham at the Coal Research Establishment, so been around here.
Well, that means you're well qualified.
So what I want to just have a brief outline on, I do really mean brief, is where the standards or decision-making bodies relate to each other, both in terms of how the SLTC can influence that and how it relates to what happens in the UK, in Europe and internationally. And there's going to be a lot of references to sort of numbered committees, but what I've tried to do is actually identify what these committees mean, try to remove the numbers, because you will hear, when people are talking about standards, a lot of numbers. And it is very confusing for people going into a situation where they get all these numbers barked at them and there's not any description behind it. So what I've tried to do is pick out what these standards committees are actually dealing with. I'm not going to go into detail about the individual standards that they're dealing with, because that's really what the committees do. But I want to sort of see how the SLTC can interact with these committees. Well, firstly, we need to know why we've got the standards that we have. It really is to allow direct comparison and direct relationship. It came from the engineering areas and things like railways, where having an important standard product to be made to meant that you have exchange of product between different systems. Because if you're manufacturing trains, you want to make sure they'll be able to run on any set of rails. So actually having a standard for what those rails are is vitally important. And this has developed into a whole lot of different standards which really specify a range of different products, and they can be used by the manufacturers of products, used by the retailers to make sure the products they're buying are fit for purpose. Laboratories are using testing standards to make sure that we are carrying out assessments in a controlled manner, and obviously government in procurement and making sure that the things that are done in support of government are done the correct way. Some standards are mandatory, and if you're supplying into certain fields, you have to meet them. Others are guidelines and systems of work. And so there's a whole different range of standards. And I just want to highlight the differences with a couple of examples between specifications and test methods. A specification will list a set of performance criteria for a particular product type. An example from the leather industry is the SEN 13336, which is the standard for upholstery leathers. And that in itself will not contain any test methods, but it will call up a series of performance guidelines, and then it will sort of say it must meet all these. And one of the standards it calls up, and I've done myself down because I actually meant to put the title of this one in, is BSE and ISO 4045, which is a test method to tell you how to determine the pH of a leather. And that is, in the specification, there are the pass-fail criteria of what it would meet, but BSE 4045 is how you actually do it. So you've got test methods and specifications. So who actually writes these standards? Well, a lot of the standards used in leather have actually been written by the members of the society. The SLTC official methods fed into a lot of the work that is being done. But in terms of who's guardian of the standards and who looks after the standardisation body, each country has its own standards bodies. Some of them are more active than others, and the BSI is active not only in the UK but also elsewhere. And you will see a lot of these different initials, particularly the first one, on standards from the respective countries. And a BS method will be the same as the DIN, if it's a BSEN method, it will be the same as the DIN-EN method, it's just in a different language. Because the British Standards Institute actually publishes all the international standards that are sold in the UK. Obviously America is slightly different because they have their ASTM methods which are outside the SEN. They're all national standard bodies. And these are just examples. A lot of the smaller countries have their own bodies as well. So what is the British Standards Institute? It has a royal charter, like the BBC, and it traces its origin back to 1901. It wasn't called BSI in 1901, but that's when these architects, engineers came together to start to begin the process of standardisation. In my research with writing this, I found out that the oldest standard currently in use dates back to 1927, and that is for just specifying the size and dimensions of rivets. And many international standards, such as the Environmental Management System standards, actually started life as British standards and have evolved through the process into internationally recognised standards. As I mentioned, many of the European test methods that we use for leather, both physical and chemical tests, have been developed from the SLTC official methods, and the European methods are actually dual numbered with IUC IUP methods. The SLTC actually has a seat on the UK Mirror Committee, which is called TCI 69. There's a whole, all the committees that BSI are responsible for have unique numbers, and they're distributed by letters and numbers. And the ones for apparel and textiles come under these sort of CI grouping. TCI 69 is actually a combination of three previously existing committees, but they were brought together quite a few years ago to form a leather, footwear and coated fabrics committee. The chair of this committee is currently sat to my right, who took over earlier this year from the previous chair, Richard Turner. And the committee had been relatively inactive over the past couple of years. It was functioning in terms of it was taking decisions, the members were being consulted, but it wasn't meeting on a regular basis. This year we reconstituted it. We've reformed 3 subcommittees for each of the individual areas. And SATRA actually not only has the chair, but it also runs that on a contract basis for BSI. BSI has downsized quite considerably over the past few years. And the lady from the SDC was mentioning that they actually get involved in standardisations, and they run one of the fastness colour committees, colour fastness committees for BSI, whereas SATRA runs the footwear, leather and coated fabrics one for BSI on a contract basis. But a lot of committees, a lot of very small committees, have now not actually got a secretariat provided by BSI. Some large committees will have secretariat provided by BSI, but a lot of ones just get technical support via a help desk. And there's been a lot of consternation about that, but it's the environment we're working in. Now this is it's very small, but what I will do is just to show how these committees are linked in. This is TCI 69 here, footwear, leather and coated fabrics. And it is part of a group of committees about apparel and textiles, which come under the guise of TCI 100. And all that is a coordination committee for apparel and textiles. So all the chairs of the individual committees meet together on this TCI 100, which normally meet maybe once a year. The chair of that is, I think, Frank Moore from John Lewis, but he may be standing down. So the TCI 81 here, that's the Colour Fastness and Colour Measurement Committee, which is currently the one that the SDC provides the secretariat for. There are other committees, TCI 24, which is physical testing of textiles, TCI 66, which is clothing and apparel, TCI 80, which is chemical testing of textiles, and TCI 82, which is laundering. On each of these committees, there is a group of technical experts, and they are made up of laboratories that carry out testing, retail groups, manufacturers and suppliers, and consumer groups and other interested bodies. And there are a whole range of bodies that can actually nominate to each committee. Not everyone always will turn up to each meeting, but there are a list of nominating organisations from the various sectors of industry. And their role, and it is, you do not get paid to attend BSI committee meetings, is normally done out of an interest that the organisations they represent will have in making sure that standardisation process is smooth and working. They administer the British standards, these national committees, but they also propose the collective UK view on the European and international standards, and they nominate the delegates to attend the international standards meetings, both at SEN and ISO level. SEN is the European body. It actually came into existence after ISO. And from TCI 69, we nominate delegates to attend various committees. And obviously the one that's important is TC 289. I've got separate slides on the first two of these as to what they actually get involved in. And TC 309 for footwear. But TC 248 is an absolutely massive committee, so it covers the whole range of textiles. And coated fabrics is just one part of that. But also, we have interest in what's going on in other different sectors, such as safety footwear from a leather point of view. Again, in safety footwear standards, there are important technical requirements for the leather that goes into making safety footwear. And so we have an impact and we have an interest in what goes on in all those committees. So, just a brief run-through of the major committees. TCI 289, this is the leather committee at SEN level. It has 4 different working groups. First, it's on chemical testing. So this is particularly important for looking at, particularly the restricted substances. Originally, it would probably have been involved in characterisation, but now it's more concerned with the chemicals that are going to be restricted, both as part of REACH legislation and because of consumer concerns. There's a physical testing committee, which SATRA actually holds the chair under Mike Wilson. He represents us on TC 289. Definitions and terms, actually going forward with a series of recognised definitions and terms, and that's virtually finished now. We're getting to the end of that piece of work. And so working groups will probably become dormant until they decide they need to renew. Because all these standards are meant to be evolving. They have a regular review period and a regular revision period. Sometimes that review will just be sort of saying, is this standard meeting our needs? And if the answer is yes, then it will get renewed automatically. But if people do raise concerns, then it will have to be revised and go through the process. And working group 4 is at furniture level. They tend to have major 2 or 3 day meetings where all of the working group meet at once. TC 309 for footwear has 2 major working groups, physical test methods and chemical test methods. I sit on working group, both of these working groups, but obviously the chemical test methods is a lot more active at the moment because there's a lot of work doing to meet the requirements of REACH. TC 309 actually meets in conjunction with the ISO committee in footwear, so really they are the same committee. They just hold meetings which has 2 agendas which are identical, there's some different numbers at the top. But there are some more delegates, like South Africans, Chinese, who tend to attend, who can vote only on the ISO parts of decisions. Once you begin to get into the sort of system of how a standard is produced with all these different stages, and each stage has a timescale, the technical support that's provided from SEN is invaluable, because the chairman and the experts are there to provide their technical expertise. They rely on the secretariat to provide the standards expertise in order to make sure they're meeting the timescales and meeting the appropriate publishing requirements. The good news about SEN committees is they all meet and have their discussions in English, which is really absolutely brilliant for me, because I speak no foreign languages whatsoever. But it does mean that as the English speakers on any committee, you tend to get looked to try and arbitrate on any English decisions, which is quite a bit of a responsibility. Especially if there are two English speakers in the room, they disagree, which doesn't go down well. So ISO has been in existence for over 60 years. And BSI was one of the founder members of ISO. These are truly international standards. They're recognised beyond the borders of Europe, and now with America and China and India playing such an important part, these standards are going to become more and more important. They are perhaps going to be marginalising the European standards, but there's still a lot of activity in SEN. It's just they're expecting the work that goes on with SEN to be more coordinated, and SEN doing less independently. And there is an agreement between SEN and ISO to avoid duplication, and that's referred to as the Vienna Agreement. It was signed in 1991, and it's really intended to avoid the duplication of work, where you've got a SEN committee and an ISO committee, who are working normally on the same material. And this is important in leather, because the leather committee in ISO, unlike the footwear committee, does not meet at the same time. It does not have the same constitution, and so therefore they could theoretically be doing the same thing twice. But because of the Vienna Agreement, this really, if work is going on in ISO, then SEN work can be dropped because they know it's going on in ISO, and vice versa. They can agree to give SEN the lead in particular standards. It also allows international external to the EU members access to the European market to avoid accusations of barriers to trade. And it means that if there is an existing SEN standard, then there is a very swift mechanism for allowing that to be adopted as an international standard, and the other way around. There is also a clause which also applies to national standards, because the UK is part of SEN and ISO, we actually sign up to this. If a European or an international standard is published and there is a conflicting British standard, then that has to be withdrawn, because if it conflicts, unless we can demonstrate that they are not identical, that there is a technical reason to retain the original standard. So really this is where the international standards will take precedence over the British standard. I briefly mentioned the International Leather Committee, ISO 120. It's currently held, the Secretariat and chair is held by India, and we have UK representation on this, though obviously these meetings tend to be held in India. It's not as easy as to get to as meetings in Italy, Brussels, or often in the UK where the European meetings are held. And there is some conflict between the European view and the view of the Secretariat and some other countries. So the meetings there tend not to be as harmonious. When UK experts that are nominated by our committee go to European meetings, when they meet in a working group, they go as an expert and they hold an expert opinion. But they also have, for each group, they have a plenary meeting, so for each session. And there, they actually take votes on standards, and there they actually have to represent the UK view. They're not representing their technical expertise, they're actually representing the agreed UK view. As a slight anecdote, I did actually go to a meeting, it was in the safety footwear standards area, where it was held in Italy, and the constitution of the people around the table was 6 Italians, a German, a Frenchman, and myself. And all the Italians that actually had a meeting before this meeting to agree on an Italian position at this standards meeting. However, they couldn't keep to it. And we actually ended up with, at one point, one of the Italian delegates asking the Italian chairman to step outside the room for a private discussion because everything was getting a bit too heated in the room, which goes to show people don't always keep to these sort of rules of engagement, but there are rules of engagement, and it is down to the qualities of individual chairmen to make sure that they are kept to. You're listening. So coming back to the SLTC, as I said, we actually have a role on TCR 69. We actually have a seat on TCR 69. Which for a long time has been filled very ably and very competently by Axel Landon, and he's put an awful lot of effort into making sure that our standards and the test method he knows an awful lot about and passing on his knowledge, which I find, actually the talks today have actually had quite a bit of serendipity and crossover, even though they probably weren't planned that way. We thought what Carl's been talking about how this information is passed on, and also some of the other things that we raised earlier in the day have actually come together. So Axel has now indicated that he wants to stand down. Whilst the chair and myself are both members of the committee, we are on the committee for our other roles, because I'm the UK delegate to TC309 and the chair is often the chair. There is still a potential for someone to come on to the committee to represent SLTC. So there is that opportunity. I think so it went in the last journal.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the AGM, in fact. I'm going to see if we can nominate somebody.
But what we also want to do as a society is to begin to look. We have our official methods as well, and there's no reason why those cannot meet our needs where they're not in conflict. Because, like I say, a lot of our official methods have been taken forward into the standardisation arena, but some of them have not. Some of them have been retained by us. And what we need to know is which ones of those are important to the industry. So they can be all done in the laboratory, they'll have meaning in the laboratory, but which ones are being used by industry, which ones are important, which ones are flawed, which ones need updating. Because we can actually, as a society, take these forward, and then that's again something that the society will have. And so what I'm asking is, if people do have an interest in standardisations, or if anyone in your organisations have an interest in particularly the less leather testing methods, whether it's physical expertise or chemical expertise, please let me know, and we will try and get together a few people on fairly infrequent basis. It won't be a big commitment, probably somewhere like Kettering on Hampton, to just get together and discuss some of the issues surrounding the standards, and get a programme together to try and develop those as for the benefit of the society. So please, contact me. These presentation will be on the website soon. It's got my email address. Anyone who wants my card can have it as well. So please use the society to promote what you feel the industry needs, and we will get the requirements together, really, so the voice of the society is heard both at national level, but also taking that forward into the European and international level. Thank you very much.